Welcome, families, to this very special unplugged edition of the Michigan Family Wellness Podcast. I just want to thank you guys for tuning in this week. Today, I actually sit down with my beloved, with my bride, and we just share our story in the context of our dating relationship, with it being Valentine's Day, just to kind of give you guys more insight into getting to know us better and just sharing some of the things that we did, some of the things that we did not do, that eventually led to our pretty happy marriage. So we're actually going to get the discussion started here very soon, but as always, if there's anything you hear on this edition or anything you've heard on any previous editions of the Michigan Family Wellness Podcast, please email me at drkyle@michiganfamilywellness.com. Well, hey, welcome everyone to this special edition of the podcast. I am just so excited to be able to bring this to you on Valentine's Day, and not only that, but just give you guys a little bit of insight into my relationship with my beloved, my bride. Rachel is here with me. How's it going, babe?
I'm okay. A little sick.
Gotcha. Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time to sit down and provide this value for all of our listeners. And I just want to tell you how much I love you. Happy Valentine's Day.
I love you too, honey.
Awesome. All right, everyone. So we want this conversation to speak to the single, the married, the man or woman, really in any situation in life. You know, culturally, there's a lot of brokenness out there. And we really want to share our experience, the way that kind of we approach dating. And also, this is another caveat. This doesn't have to just apply to, people on the younger end of the spectrum with regards to their age. This can apply to people who are widowed, divorced. There's all sorts of situations and circumstances that we find ourselves in life. And I want this to provide value to people, like I said, whether they're single, married, or in any situation in life. So again, culturally, there's a little bit of a problem when it comes to relationships. And again, the whole purpose of this is that the idea of relationships affect our health. And so that's why we wanted to just share a little bit about ourselves and, demonstrate that, to really have a healthy lifestyle, you have to have healthy relationships as well. And that can be some of the most difficult things to navigate, is that relational part of life. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely. I think you and I talk a lot about how our relationship affects just how even we do our jobs, how we have our other friendships. If you and I are doing well, it feels like all those other things just get easier. And when you and I are having a hard time, it definitely spills over.
Absolutely. And I would further add, again, we're going to be specific to when we were dating. We're not coming on here as a married couple and saying that we're, this happily, perfectly married couple, and here's, the 5 practical applications. Here are the 6 steps, to joy and happiness in a marriage. What we're actually doing is we are looking back and we are saying, hey, these are some of the things we did. These are some of the things that we did not do. And this is why we found them to be effective. And, that's how we approached a healthy dating atmosphere or an experience, if you will. So anything you want to add to that?
Well,
in terms of context?
Yeah. Well, I would just say, our dating relationship started at a time that was really unique for both of us. It was a lot of transition going on. So I grew up in Indiana, but I had spent 2 years working out in California. I had just moved back from California to go to grad school in Michigan when you and I met. And so, it was my first time definitely living in the state. I was going to, a new program, a new school. I didn't know anybody. I made all my friends just through the school and through the church we attended. And, it was just a lot. I only lived there for 12 months before I graduated and then moved back to Indiana. So it was kind of a unique time. All my relationships were new at that point, with everyone. But it also was kind of a fun time. We got to know each other in a very specific context. But then, over the years, we've done a lot of moves together and apart. And we've gotten to see just how that relationship works outside of that context. So that's been really interesting for me.
We're going to share a couple stories that actually happened why don't we go ahead and share how we first met, just because I love that. So like Rachel said, she had been living out in California, moved to Michigan, where I was living at the time. And it was actually a bike ride that we first met each other on. It was pouring rain. We did not talk very much, if at all. And
I didn't know your name after that.
Yeah.
There was a whole group of people. I didn't know any of them.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fun ride, but it definitely wasn't, the start of anything.
For those
major.
of you who know the Dexter Cider Mill, we actually biked from Ann Arbor to the Dexter Cider Mill out on Huron River Drive out there, which is very beautiful, but not so much fun in the rain. But so from that, there was actually another bike ride the following weekend, and this is back in 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Fall
so
of 2010.
We did some more talking on that second bike ride and kind of made a connection there. And then I always want to say like the rest is history, but there's been a lot more to it than that. So
that's when I learned your name.
Yes. So really, I think one thing that can transition us into sort of the concepts and the, things that we did in terms of our dating relationship is right after that second bike ride, at least speaking for me personally, I was very intentional about just pursuing you and being very interested in you, in that romantic way, but just being, something we're going to mention in terms of communication, I wanted to be very intentional and be very clear with my communication to let you know that, I wanted to pursue this to see if this would be a good fit, for the rest of our lives type thing. Yeah.
Well, and from the other side, I was absolutely not interested in a relationship with anyone.
That's right. So tell them why. Yeah.
Well, I when I was out in California, I had a pretty serious relationship that ended abruptly and just was kind of painful. And it had been a good 6 months since that had happened, but I moved to Michigan with the idea of I'm not going to stay here. I don't know where I'm going to end up, but I'm only here to get my degree and to leave. And I know it'll only be 12 months. So, as much as I'm happy to have friendships, I'm certainly not looking for anything beyond that. So, of course, that's not at all how it turned out. Now I am back in Michigan pretty permanently.
Yeah,
so.
To say that the walls, were not up is definitely, wasn't the case. Rachel had tons of just, barriers to letting people get close to her. And so...
Well, no, I would argue it was romantic relationships, not other relationships.
Context. Right.
Yeah.
No, very good point. Yep. So just being very guarded, in that romantic component for sure.
Yeah.
Which actually brings us to our first point here, actually. A lot of people, they have the benefit of being friends for a long time, before they start dating. And we're just saying with our experience, it wasn't like that. We weren't friends. We weren't like best friends, or we hadn't been friends for a very long time before we jumped into that, dating context.
Yeah, and I would say, it can work both ways. It's risky when you start to date a friend because you might lose your friend. But then it's hard to date someone that you don't really know at all. It was really important to me that at the beginning of our relationship, you were so intentional about it and you were so straightforward because, as we've stated, I was pretty cautious and I had no interest in casually trying things out with, whoever seemed interesting or interested. And so, it took a little convincing with me, but, it was really the only approach that I could kind of hear. It had to kind of hit me hard.
Right.
and then allow me some time to think about it and to know exactly where you were standing on things, and then try to figure out kind of where I stood on things. Because that, I was trying to figure out for myself what I wanted and what was important to me, and if it was even worth, the risk.
Right.
So,
going back to what you had said about, being friends first and, doing that whole thing, especially in the context when you have mutual friends. I really hate this. This is kind of just like a sidebar point, but when two people have mutual friends and then there's the unfortunate situation where, the couple does part ways or whatever, and then, all the friends go with one person or, someone gets left out. I just really, that breaks my heart.
That doesn't have to happen though.
Right. It doesn't have to happen.
Going back to the situation in California, we had a ton of mutual friends and we were able to just, they loved us both. They didn't have to choose between us. And so we were able to at least not affect that side of things. So, it just kind of depends on the group and how the group dynamics are.
Which segues perfectly into our next point. Balance between group settings and one-on-ones, essentially having a community. And so I think the point here is just that we really tried to, I guess balance is the best word. It's not like we wanted to isolate ourselves from our other friends, because I wanted to see how you reacted in group settings, and I'm sure you wanted to see the same for me. And I just think there's a lot of wisdom and insight that you can gain into someone by seeing how they react in several different environments. And I think you see a lot of that in the group setting.
Yeah. Well, and I know that even though I was new, and so most of the people that you and I were spending time with were new to me also, I did identify a couple people that I felt were, a couple women that I just felt were very trustworthy and that knew you fairly well. And I did actually ask them. Kind of got some feedback from them about who you were because they'd seen you in a longer term setting. And I mean, it was all very positive. And that just kind of let me know, what I'm seeing isn't necessarily a show that's put on for me, but it's, it's more of who you are. And then, when you moved to St. Louis,
right,
in August of 2011, and I moved to Indianapolis to work, that put us in different circles pretty dramatically.
It did,
And, then a lot of our time together wasn't with other people. It made it a little more difficult. But, we were still trying in ways, whether with family or just in visiting each other, to try to still get some of those things. Even try to, we were pretty serious at that time and even engaged for 9 of those months of that year. But just trying to see, like, how will this work? Because we know, we knew I would move down to St. Louis to be with you to so that you could finish chiropractic school. And so I knew, marrying you means uprooting again, going to St. Louis, maybe staying there, maybe going back to Michigan, maybe going somewhere else. But, part of marriage is you're agreeing that you and the other person are now making all of those decisions together.
Right.
And, prior to that, when I graduated college, I decided to move to California. So I just did it. And then I decided to go to grad school in Michigan. So I just did it.
Yeah.
And there was, I always considered my family and my friends, but I didn't have to look at that other person who was going to come along with me, because ultimately I was making the choice and living with it. And now all the choices we make directly impact each other. And we have to consider, if we want to move, it's not just you moving, it's, you and your spouse. And if you have any children, it's them also. And so, it gets more complicated. And that's what you start to get into as the relationship gets more serious, is realizing I don't just make decisions now. I have to consider you. And that can be tricky. Sometimes a little frustrating.
Yeah. So if we're advocating spending time in group settings, in community, not just having that isolated one-on-one time, would be a good thing. If that's on one end of the spectrum, something that we kind of enjoy as like our, I don't know what you want to call it, like a guilty pleasure or whatever, is just kind of laughing at the other end of that spectrum. And I just, want to share with our listeners, yes, we watch The Bachelor. We watch The Bachelorette. We think it's hilarious. We do not take it seriously at all. But it's just very interesting that our culture, that this is a thing, like this is a show. Like, in what other context do you have one man dating another 20 or 30 women, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. And like everyone's okay with it. I mean, there is no other woman that I know who would be okay, with seriously dating a guy.
Well, yeah. And then, I mean, I think even further to that, you say, like, what context are you dating this person in?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're living in a mansion with a bunch of other people who you're competing with, which of itself is a little odd. But I mean, and they kind of become your best friends throughout the process. And then, then you end up...
Rachel, it's not a process.
I know.
It's a journey.
But, then you're flying all over the world, and these dates that they go on, it's like, oh, I'm falling in love with you on the beach of a tropical island, far away. Well, that's wonderful and all, but I mean, are you going to love that person in the normal context? Or are you going to, you don't even know who their friends are. You don't even know what their family's like. You get an hour or two of time if you get that high to see their family. But it's not real life. You're not working your job.
But it's reality TV, Rachel.
Right.
It's got to be real life. It's reality TV.
And just as a side, when the girls or guys, depending on the episode, that we really seem like quality people, anytime they get sent home, we cheer for them because we think, now you're off that craziness. And maybe you can find a good relationship.
Yep.
So
For sure. Again, going back to the community thing, another component of that is just the accountability. And kind of in the same way that you had gone to a couple other women that knew me, just in the friend context and, kind of asked about me. In a similar, but maybe not exactly the same way, I had a group of guys that actually, I consulted with and said, hey, this is how I'm approaching this relationship with this woman. What do you guys think about this? Do you think that this lines up with my character, my integrity, who I am? And just to have that accountability, those checks and feedbacks on my actions, it's something that I appreciated. And then I think I would even say you appreciated that when you had learned about it.
Yeah. Well, and I got to know those guys too. And I trusted them. I knew that, you could really share whatever you needed to share with them and that they weren't going to go around and talk to other people or say anything outside, that we wouldn't want to be shared. And, they're some of our best friends now, and their wives are some of our best friends. And now we're scattered all over the country, and we don't get to see each other very frequently, but they still remain, just some really solid people that we love having in our lives. And, I appreciated that because I knew that you had people kind of balancing you out. And I had some women, that I was going to also, not as regularly, but, other people just to kind of help me sort through my thoughts and balance me. And, we continue to do that in our marriage. We continue to have some people that we trust that kind of mentor us, or, you can't go to your spouse with everything that's on your mind because sometimes the thoughts in your head are not so helpful.
Right.
And it can help to have a very trusted, wise person to turn to and say, these are all the thoughts that I'm thinking and all my frustrations, and to have that person just lovingly say, yeah, and you're wrong.
Right.
And kind of help you sort through and calm down so that then when you do talk to your spouse, you're not in that emotional state. Now, we have plenty of those conversations in the emotional state. And sometimes they're not beneficial and sometimes they are. But we love and trust each other enough to know that if we happen to say something, that we really look back on and we say that wasn't called for, I'm sorry, that's okay, that
Absolutely.
we're human and we can recover from that.
Yeah, that's been a major point, like you said, throughout our dating experience and then, crossing over again into our marriage. But yeah, going back to our timeline here, so we started together, in Southeast Michigan. And like you said, then we moved apart. So I guess just to reiterate, we actually never lived together, like in the same physical house or, while we were dating, that was just a conviction we had. We were together, like proximity wise in Michigan. And then we were long distance when I was living in St. Louis, going to chiropractic college. And then Rachel had found a job in Indianapolis. So then we're doing the whole Skype calls and video calls, and then the dynamic changed completely.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, one thing I would say that, no matter where we were living in what city, we both were, we both had decided, we're not going to have sex before marriage, just because of our spiritual views, wanting to honor God, wanting to honor each other, and then just our belief that that is the healthiest thing for a relationship. But, aside from that, we had gone from living 5 minutes away from each other, which happened to be a complete coincidence. Just the housing that I had found was just, right down the road from Kyle's family home. And so that was a great thing. It was very, very convenient when we were dating. But then we moved and we were 5 hours apart. But, I had intentionally not moved to St. Louis when I graduated, even though I was fairly certain that I would want to marry you, and that because you were going to be in St. Louis for 3.5 years that I would end up there. But I just thought, I had just completed this degree. My career was changing. You were just starting, your chiropractic degree, and that I wanted us to both be able to kind of establish ourselves in that without feeling like we were constantly with each other, constantly doing it together. And part of that is just my independent streak of I need to just go do my own thing and make sure that I'm never dating you because I feel like I should because I moved here.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad we did it that way because you were so busy with school. You had so much going on, especially that first year. And I think it was helpful that I wasn't expecting you to be nearly as attentive as when we had been living 5 minutes away and our schedules were completely different. And we both had a little bit more free time. So
yeah, I think that goes along great with just one of your notes. Happy singles make happy couples.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about that for a second. I mean, we had kind of this foundation living together in Michigan, and then taking that foundation with us when we were separated, was very helpful, I think. But then we were still also doing our own things.
Yeah.
So it's not like our identity was wrapped up in this relationship. And I think, you see that a lot with people. They really put their identity, who they are, their self-worth into whatever it is, whether it's a relationship or a job or, a material possession, or maybe even just a life stage, becoming pregnant. There's all these things that, and this is kind of our point. It's like having this groundedness, this foundation of knowing who you are and, being content, joyful, and happy with, in your singleness is going to ultimately create that and cultivate that wonderful marriage that can come about naturally.
Yeah, and I think that's true of just any relationship, whether it's a family member, a friend, a romantic relationship. If you need that other person, you need to lean on them and they need to lean on you, and one of you falls, you both fall. But if you're able, just as an analogy, to kind of stand facing each other, intimate and close, but also knowing that, if one of you is just having a really hard time, the other person can be supportive, but doesn't rely on you to be their support, and that vice versa. So I'm not saying that, we don't support each other in our marriage. We absolutely do, and it's important. But at the same time, when one of us is just more stressed out, more tired or sick or something like that, the other person has the capacity to say, okay, I'll help you out right now. But if I need support, I also have other things I can go to because you're not as much in a place to support me. Whether that's other people, other just, healthy lifestyle things that we do. And that's really important because, we have bad days, we have bad weeks, we have, sometimes bad months or bad years. And a lot of times it can be, well, I need you and I need you to be this. Well, one person in that relationship is not always going to be what the other person needs. And so when you get to the commitment level of marriage, you have to understand that sometimes your spouse will not be what you need or what you want in that moment, because they're a person too. And, in a healthy relationship, you're always working back towards it, but it can't be absolutely vital, or you will quickly reach the point where you say, this just isn't working anymore. You're not who I need. And well, our view of marriage is that that's not the ultimate goal of marriage, is to be with that person that you need and they need you, but is beyond that. It's being with a person who together you guys are more together than you were apart. But there are ups and downs in that.
Actually, something we say on the podcast.
Oh, okay. That's right.
Not in the same context.
Yes,
but,
different context. But it's true, that we can do far more.
We can do far more together than we could ever do apart. And everyone, Rachel listens to every single second of all of the podcasts.
Because I'm a really supportive wife.
Yes, because she is a supportive wife. She has listened to every single, and I'm joking, she hasn't. So
yeah. That's not how I support you. I
still love you.
I love you too. Speaking of which, you want to tell the...
well, just thank you for all of that. Re-listen to that because there was a lot of insight in everything you just said. So thank you for that. But kind of going into our next story, how long had we been dating?
Before...
I think we were engaged for 9 months. We dated for a year. Well, and I would say, probably around 8 months within the dating relationship?
So we started dating...
No. Yeah, no, you're right, because it was February, wasn't it? No, it was.
I don't know. But we started dating in
October.
October of 2010.
Yes.
And we got married August of 2012.
Right.
And we got engaged Thanksgiving of
but I had
2011.
The whole I love you thing. That happened only a couple months afterwards.
We only dated a little bit over a year before we were engaged.
Right.
Yeah. So the I love you. You were too. You were eager.
Yes. The whole point was I was just captivated by this beautiful woman and I was just completely stricken. I just loved her and adored her so much that I had to verbally make this confession and tell her that I loved her, right?
Yeah.
So I can remember it like it was yesterday. We're on the front porch, right outside your house, and I had just told you that I loved you. And I was expecting to hear, I love you back, but why don't you tell them what really happened?
Well, I mean, I kind of knew what was coming. I certainly wasn't surprised. I knew that I wasn't ready to say that back. I certainly felt love for you, but as we stated, I was being, more cautious, and we hadn't been together a terribly long time. So as much as I believed you were sincere, I wasn't really in the exact same place as you. So, I didn't know quite what to say because I knew I wasn't going to reciprocate, but I didn't want to give some speech about, why I wasn't reciprocating. So I just apparently used the line from Han Solo in Star Wars and said, I know.
Yeah, so I wasn't expecting that, but it was hilarious actually.
Well, and I didn't realize, you teased me about it for quite a while, and then one time you sent me that clip from Star Wars, and I love the Star Wars movies, the originals, and I love Han Solo, and so just seeing, Han Solo and Leia as Han Solo is about to be frozen, and possibly die, and Leia yells out, I love you, and he just says, I know, and then, gets frozen, and I was like, oh my gosh, maybe that's where that came from.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, babe. I'm glad that, we're both able to confess and profess our love for each other now.
Yeah, it's not hard now.
Yeah, so thank you so much just for talking this out together. I really appreciate it. I want to wish you a happy Valentine's Day. I want to wish everyone listening a happy Valentine's Day. And again, the whole purpose of this, families, the whole purpose for everyone listening is just to give you an insight, to share our story, to share our experience, not to come across as experts, with the, 6 or 7 steps, for an amazing relationship or a great marriage, but just to kind of show you, these are some of the things that we did, these are some of the things that we did not do, and I would say we're pretty happy together.
Yeah.
I certainly enjoy being your husband. I like to refer to myself as a warrior husband, just to kind of emphasize the intentionality I take into being your husband.
You are very intentional and intense.
Yes. So again, thank you guys. Have a great Valentine's Day and have an awesome week.